Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the U Talk Show. Where, despite me being sick, I feel like I'm a little more coherent at the moment. I think it's because we had some lovely joking there about the potential of breaking Constitution, but that's a story for another time. For now, I will just say that we are continuing Union Week, and we're asking the question: how have unions affected Australian politics and society? Horst, I know that you're probably going to know the history of this better than me. I want to know, in very practical terms, what did they do? What were their exact actions?
Well, the first thing I want to point out is that one of my reference materials is a history of the Australian Labour Movement by E.W. Campbell, which was published by the Communist Party of Australia. So, this is a group with a very strong interest in demonstrating the successes of uprisings and trade unionism. And I just want to acknowledge that before we get any further.
Yeah,
So we sort of have
there's
trade.
just a slight possibility for rose tinted glasses to be being worn in this report.
So no, they're blue. The trade unions
I
sort
don't
of
get it.
really
I'm
first.
confused and a little scared.
They're
But
blue.
oh,
Um,
it was that
yeah.
simple.
One of the
Go on.
biggest things that happened at the genesis of the labor movement was during the gold rush and the Eureka Rebellion. We referred to this a little bit 2 videos ago. When we found that Australia had a bunch of gold, the British were like, colonialism intensifies. And they promptly sought to regulate the manner in which gold could be mined. Um, at the time, hundreds of thousands of immigrants were drawn to Australia to potentially strike their own fortune. And there were French, there were Germans, there were Irish, there were English. There are also some Chinese folks, though interestingly enough, we don't talk about them as frequently. And despite the fact that all of these people came together from very disparate backgrounds, when the colonial governors decided that it was time to legislate, to borrow a phrase, we will determine who mines here and the manner in which they mine. Howard's got to be good for something, right? Yeah, at this point, all of these people from very different backgrounds came together, developed what the communists or socialists would refer to as a class consciousness, and fought back. They were hostile to this concept of licensure that was required. The idea was that the discovery of gold meant that every man could be his own boss. The digger was not working for a wage. Anyone who could get a pick, a shovel, and a dish was free to get some gold. In towns, if you're on ranches, you might depend on someone else for a living, but out on the gold fields, you could be your own man. That was very romantic, of course. More people lost their fortune than found it trying to strike gold. But that is the background against the Eureka Rebellion, and it's the reason that you'll still see the flag of the Eureka Stockade associated with trade unionism over 150 years later in Australia. That was the turning point, the moment in Australia where the little guy stood up to the big guy and won. And it's something that has carried forward in our collective consciousness.
Huh? Two things there. First, I would say that it's actually just something funny. It's kind of interesting how, at the Eureka Stockade, they lost the battle, but they essentially won most of what they wanted in the end. They got most of what they wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Winning by losing is I think that's kind of funny, actually.
It's like the opposite of a Pyrrhic victory.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know if there is such a thing as a Pyrrhic defeat, but
I mean, Paris did get completely destroyed. I think in the third battle,
Mm.
but that's a whole different thing. But that that is also, you're talking about the reason why it's still this why the flag is still used as a potent symbol of the unions 150 years later to this day, but it's
Yeah,
also why it's used as a potent symbol for a lot in Australia to this day. A lot of
including white nationalist ethnocentrism.
I was about to get to that sort of thing actually, because it's a very potent symbol of Australia. It's something that's been permanently pushed into the historical and cultural zeitgeist of Australia. Is that flag and what it represents, which essentially a lot of people argue as to what it represents, but I think that what you were just talking about, if you could, my brain's not working properly. So if you could just kind of give us a brief summary of what you just said it was about and what it represents, because I think right now you can say it better than I could.
I think what you're getting to is that the Eureka Stockade flag represents many things to many people. We have people who are associating it with a time when Australia was far whiter, um,
Well,
to
well,
a time where there was allegedly equal opportunity for all. And we have on this other side the very historical trend of trade unionism, which is in many ways fundamentally opposite. A time when people, regardless of kin or kith, regardless of the color of their skin, came together, the underdog fighting back against the oppressive heel of capitalist masters who didn't even live here.
I think that part at the end, because what I'm trying to get at is people. There are many who are trying to use the cultural zeitgeist of that symbol. They're trying to use that symbol for their own ends. But the point that I'm of what I was trying to say is actually the opposite of what you think I was trying to say, which is you think I was trying to say that it means many things to many people. Whereas what I'm trying to say is that it's less like that it means many things to many people, but rather that the story and the reasons behind it, the oh, there's a word there that I'm looking for. Um, what stood behind that flag was
Yeah, the
something
symbology and the
specific.
narrative, yes.
Yeah, but what like people will use the symbology and the narrative for purposes that have nothing to do with what that event was about, and what that event was really about was that standing up for what in their eyes was right, and resisting that unfair situation of the mining licenses that was forced upon them.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure that I summarized it well, but if you'd like to summarize it better.
No, I'd just like to go on because we've gotten a little bit sidetracked in this symbolism here.
Yes, I
Um,
mean we've spent almost half the episode talking about what is I think actually, you know what, that I think it's justified, because that is a very important event in Australian history,
okay, but
because
let's get back
it
to the
was the
rest of
birth
this.
of the union movement,
Yeah,
and the birth of the cultural zeitgeist of the very idea of the fair go in Australia. I mean, I would say it's entirely uniquely Australian, but
I
the
think
those
that
words are fair
predates.
go.
I
Those
think
words are fair
I
go.
think the
I
fair
think
suck of the Sav is like something that predates the gold mines. And I
yes,
think a huge
but
part of
I
that was because the initial population of Australia were convicts who had not, in fairness, been treated very fairly. In fact, you
mm.
could say that more that cricket, more than anything, our national sport is saying "fuck you" to the English. But like,
Yes. If only we did the same thing with the Americans.
okay, so
That
the
Ignore me.
primary
I'm
thing that
just
unions did,
pissy
right?
at them.
We want to we've sort of looked at um the Eureka Stockade and this sort of galvanizing moment, which is in about 1854, 1855. The next thing that the labor movement did was the 8-hour workday.
Mm.
And that was,
That was
we think
that
that's a
was that was
modern.
done. If I remember correctly, that came out of a that was part of a few things that came out of a royal commission called by a Labour Prime
Nope,
Minister.
you're wrong.
No,
Nope.
but I thought it was around the
Nope.
same time as Jack Lang, when
No,
Jack
it
Lang
was
was
not.
premier, and there was a
No, it was not.
but a royal commission determined that wages
No,
should be 40%
no,
higher.
no. Stop, stop, stop.
No,
No royal commission, no gods, no masters. Stop.
okay,
The
you tell me
8-hour
that.
working day was first brought as an employer's concession in 1856.
Say what?
About 70 years before Jack Lang was involved in politics.
Why have we not learned about this in school?
Because it's not in the interests of
Of
anyone really to
corporation.
teach you how powerful unions can be. Like the stonemasons in Sydney
It's in the
got the
public
shorter working
interest,
day.
in my opinion.
They got the shorter working day in 1856, but that was something that was specific to their profession, so stonemasons. In Melbourne, there was a sort of a federation of trade unions, and they managed in 1857 to sort of get that to be the norm for the entire state. And in 1858, at that point, by 1858, throughout New South Wales and Victoria, the 8-hour workday was the standard for artisans and builders.
For artisans, but not other industries.
No, that happened later in the 1870s.
Wow. Okay. So by the time that it was actually fully formalized in law, it was the unions had basically already achieved it, and they were just trying to get the stragglers. Is what I'm getting from this.
Yep.
Wow, unions did even more in that than I thought. That was a long process. That
Yeah.
was 50, 60 years, is what I'm hearing.
So the problem is that when we get up to the 1890s, union membership in every sector fell because of an economic depression and a number of strikes where unions were trying to retain good conditions for their workers led to their failure and collapse. Remember what you were saying about like actual militants? We got compulsory arbitration in the 1910s.
Compulsory arbitration reminds me what that is again.
The Fair Work Commission, but older.
Oh, okay.
Compulsory arbitration allowed for a series of mechanisms by law where employers were forced to come to the table and to compromise with workers on matters of mutual interest. The ACTU, the Australian Council of Trade Unions, was established in 27 because unions sort of regained their strength during that period and then got dicked over again because, wouldn't you know it, just after that there was another depression.
Yeah.
Actually, so you sort of have this weird section where unions' power is sort of waxing and waning. It directly links to economic conditions.
Which is, in a way, it's kind of, what's the word? It's kind of crappy because when economic conditions are worse is when we need unions the most.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's also when the people who have the money have the most power. Like this is a paradox, right? Anyway, in the 50s, we have the trade unions being accused of being communists, basically all of them. I've spoken before about how the SDA came out of the split of the Labour Party into the Labour Party and the Labour Party, but with less communists.
Yeah.
But at this point, the union movement started going for equal pay for women, equal pay for indigenous people, and they started
Oh yes,
progressing
very
into
very
a
communist
political.
things. Equal pay for equal work. Yes,
Yeah,
very
but they
communist.
started turning their attention to political lobbying sort of during the 70s. Things like fighting the Vietnam War, things like protection of the environment. If you've ever heard about the green bans, those were,
I vaguely heard about them.
yeah, those
What
were
I
the
remember
Builders
from that.
Federation refusing to take on certain jobs because it would fuck the natural environment.
Yeah, what I remember from that is a female journalist being lured into a nightclub and then never seen again as
I
part of that
believe
whole
you're
story.
talking about Juanita Nielsen.
I think that's it, actually. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Um, she disappeared after attending a meeting at the Carousel, and her body has never been found, which means realistically it's at the bottom of Sydney Harbour or in a barrel of lye somewhere.
Yeah. Hey, remember what I said in an earlier episode about businesses getting away with literal murder when we don't have strong unions and when we don't have like
Yep,
anything to counter their power? Yeah, I just thought it
yep.
would be pertinent to bring that up here. Anyway, in other news, let's talk
Well,
about the outcomes
you
because
asked what the unions have done, and that is sort of where we're hitting the key points, right?
yeah,
Equal
and
equal wages for equal work for women, and then for brown people and or black people, and then
oh,
protecting
don't forget
migrants'
Medicare.
rights, and
They
then
don't forget Medicare. The unions really pushed for that. The unions also really pushed for JobKeeper. So anyone today, if you're thinking, what have the unions done for us recently? JobKeeper. It was their plan. Quite literally, before it was bastardized by the Liberal Party, JobKeeper was their plan that they came up with for how to make sure the Australian economy didn't go into a much more severe recession and to support workers over the time period that
when they
COVID
were
was
unable to work. Yeah.
that COVID was stopping them from working. So I mean, this kind of gets into my second point, which is what were the outcomes of the union actions? We've kind of mixed that into this. We've talked about what the outcomes were. It's things like that. Things like maternity leave were also things that were pushed for by the unions.
You know
So
who
the
else
unions
pushed
have
for
done a lot for
maternity
us.
leave? Hitler.
Is that meant to just be a joke
No,
or
no.
a
I'm pointing
fun
out.
fact or a bit of both?
I'm pointing out that the Nationalsozialismus Deutsche Arbeitspartei had as its policy maternal health care fully paid for by the state and maternal leave for women workers because, they can't produce that next generation of perfect blonde German babies if the mothers die in childbirth.
Yeah, I I don't know. To me, it felt like a joke because it's basically a trope to be like, who also believed in that? Hitler.
Barbie.
Wait, Bobby, what? I haven't seen the
No,
movie yet,
no,
but I
no, no.
hear
That's
it's.
just.
Oh, okay.
You know who else
Um,
believed in equal pay for equal work, even for women? Oppenheimer. I'm
well,
not even joking. He gave the scientists' wives work. Some of them were university educated, and he gave them work on the teams that were working on the bomb. And those who weren't sciences trained, he was using as secretaries because they were already here and sworn to secrecy anyway. So it was only right to allow them to
that's
do
not
their
bad
part and to
actually.
pay them.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's not bad actually. It's like they're already under the same conditions, like effectively non-disclosure agreements. So why not give them jobs as well? That's
fundamentally
just
speaking, treating
yeah,
women the same as men is very utilitarian.
not exactly the same. There are differences, but that's a whole
Well,
other
I mean, yeah,
conversation that
that's
we're not
medical.
getting
That's
into
medical in
because
life.
I do
Yeah.
not do identity politics unless you want me to rage at you for a bit,
No, I'm
which
just sort
you
of
don't.
pointing out that a lot of the what we would call socially progressive movements from the 1800s through even the 1970s were realistically highly aligned with what we value in terms of not wasting potential, in
Mm.
terms of allowing everyone to achieve in society.
And a great many supported by unions.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I guess that's. I mean, we've run out of time, so we'll let
Yeah,
everyone
I think
go.
we've sort of got that there.
Yeah. I
Next
mean,
up,
I'll
should you join a union? The short answer may surprise you. Might surprise you.
take care, everyone.
Good night.